But my view is that obviously there's a cost to Brexit, but to not obey the result of the referendum would also bring with it a huge democratic cost, and therefore there's a trade-off that you must make in order to deliver on the will of the referendum, in my view, in the way that meets the needs of British industry and business and does the best for our economy and delivers a trading future that is right for our countries. That's my sort of take on the deal and why I think it's the right compromise, the pragmatic thing to do. If the deal fails, then make no mistake, the clock is ticking down as a consequence of us having triggered Article 50. The clock is ticking down for us to leave the European Union. At 11 p.m. on the 29th of March 2019, if nothing else happens between now and then, if Parliament just shuts up shop, we're leaving at that minute on that day. For that to change, and this is a really important thing for those of you who are Remainers and want a second referendum, because the decision to trigger Article 50 was a matter of primary legislation, we passed an act to do so. Only an act of Parliament can reverse that decision to stop the clock on Article 50 or to rescind it altogether, which is a big, big deal. If we end up in a no-deal scenario, then obviously we crash out of the EU in its hardest form. If the EU were to turn around to us and say, okay, well, you've gone for no deal, we're no longer talking to you, you're not talking to us, en chance, then we end up in a situation which is quite brutal. The probability is that there'd be a lot of fast footwork to mitigate some of the harder impacts of no deal between now and then. But we shouldn't sugarcoat it. No deal is a long, long way from a walk in the park, and WTO is not, well, trading under the World Trade Organization terms, is not an automatic thing that happens very easily. There are all sorts of things around tariffs and quotas and wider sort of scheduled non-tariff barriers, as they're called, NTBs, that are all sorts of friction for the system that we would have to get our head around and accept that it comes at a cost. Then there's a second referendum. I think that that would be the most extraordinary betrayal of the fact that we've already had a referendum, we've got our answer, but there are plenty of people that disagree. So the sort of objective analysis on the second referendum, University College London, University, their constitutional unit, so completely independent, and the House of Commons Library, again, completely independent, both agree that the quickest that Parliament can pass an Act of Parliament is about 11 weeks. And that's if everybody agrees, in both the Commons and the Lords, you can get it through in about 11 weeks. A referendum would require an Act of Parliament. There's no provision in UK law to just have a referendum. Each referendum requires its own bill. So if everybody agreed and nobody tried to throw any grit into the system, 11 weeks to pass the bill, then the Electoral Commission has to do some work testing the question, because that's an important part of it. And then there is a mandatory 10-week campaign period before the referendum comes. So in all, a second referendum would take about 25 weeks to deliver. Half a year. 29th of March, 11 p.m, Act of Parliament required to stop the clock on Article 50, 25 weeks to deliver a referendum. Don't be wrong, Parliament is sovereign and there are ways of making things work, but for Remainers, because I've already got the hackles of the levers up in my analysis of the WTO and everything, so time to annoy the Remainers now. 6 months ago, you were cheering the House of Lords on to the rafters because they were getting in the way of the withdrawal bill. If you think that the House of Lords is not going to do it exactly the same in reverse over a referendum bill or a bill to pause Article 50, then you're kidding yourselves. And even if there's a majority ultimately in the Lords for it, whereas the Commons has these things called programme motions, which limits the time that we debate things, in the Lords there's no such thing. They can just spin this out for as long as they like, and that's the reality of our parliamentary process. Then there's EFTA, or Norway, European Free Trade Agreement, Free Trade Association, and all the Norway model, which you'll have heard spoken about. Again, perfectly credible as compromises, but EFTA is an organisation in its own right, which we would have to apply to join, and we haven't done that yet, and they haven't said that we could. The EU has said they give us a sort of Norway-style deal, but that's in terms of our relationship with the EU. We'd still need EFTA to sort of make that so. Oh, and by the way, the weakness of EFTA is that you would have to accept free movement of people because effectively it brings with it single market access. And I'm telling you, for those of you who haven't gone out and canvassed opinion very much, whether you personally agree with free movement of people, whether you spectacularly oppose it, it was the biggest driver in the way that people voted in the referendum in this part of the world 2 years ago. So EFTA brings a big decision in terms of free movement of people. And then the final bit is stopping Brexit altogether. I mean, I just think that that would be an extraordinary thing to do that would unleash huge demons within British politics, because we had a referendum in 2016 which delivered a result. We had a general election last year in which there were parties standing that said that they would offer an exit to Brexit, and they didn't do very well. The two parties that won 90% of the vote in England were committed to Brexit, take a decision about what the version of Brexit was going to be, but they were committed to Brexit. So I just think that anybody who wants to try and stop Brexit, all the parliamentary realities aside, that's quite a big betrayal of what has happened otherwise. So that's my introduction, my early analysis. I've tried as much as I can to be sort of objective in what I've said,